Welcome back, everyone, for the next session. I'm Anne Daly from Newcastle University, also a member of Munir's network, and I'm chairing this particular session, which is entitled Pharmacogenomics, Implementation in the Four Nations. Now, obviously, the NHS is devolved to the Four Nations. There's no politics involved. I think our network is very much non-political, and we don't want to get involved in that today. So we have representatives of the NHS and implementation from each of the four nations. Now, this is in order of population. So we're going to start with England, then Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Our first speaker is Vicky Chaplin. Vicky is the pharmacy genomics lead for the genomics unit at NHS England. And she is from a pharmacy background, and she has also worked as a medical advisor in the pharmaceutical industry, with a significant part of her role focusing on the intersection of medicines, medical devices, and digital tools. So I'll hand over to Vicky for the first talk.
Hi, everyone. Right, so I will jump straight into it and try and pack everything and leave a little bit of time for questions if we can. But in short, I want to give everyone here an overview today. I'm going to start off by talking about how we're approaching genomics and precision medicine in England, so in particular our strategy and the NHS Genomic Medicine Service, touching upon some of the examples where pharmacogenomics is starting to come through, and then go into a little bit more detail about how we're making that kind of a priority to link genomics with medicines optimization in our work now and moving forward. So they're the learning objectives for the session. And I'm going to start off by having a quick look at our Accelerating Genomic Medicine in the NHS strategy, which some of you may be familiar with. It came out in October last year, and that's just a nice quote we have there from our Chief Executive at NHS England, which I think highlights nicely that it's seen as a priority for us in the NHS. This is a very brief overview of our strategy, and I think I just want to draw your attention to the key themes here. So there are four key themes that run behind our strategy. So we have embedding genomics across the NHS, which really kind of focuses on the infrastructure that we need and our workforce, and I'll come back to that. We see our workforce as extremely important to drive this forward. Objective number 2, delivering equitable genomic testing for improved outcomes in cancer, rare inherited and common diseases, and enabling precision medicine and reducing adverse drug reactions. Quite a long sentence, but also I think probably where a lot of the information you'll see, and we'll touch upon it today, where we've really made and outlined some priorities for us over the next kind of 1 to 3 and 3 to 5 years, particularly in how we'll start to evaluate the pharmacogenomics work that is coming through and how we can work together with our partners to make sure that prescribers' decisions around medicines are informed by the use of genomics. We also have another 2 very important themes. So again, we'll touch upon this, but we see it very important in order to deliver genomics, and particularly pharmacogenomics, and we'll touch upon this briefly, to really consider the data and digital aspects and informatics, and that is key for us in terms of driving pharmacogenomics forward. And then our final one is continuing to evolve our service and look at research and develop and kind of be at the edge of cutting practice. So in terms of the NHS Genomic Medicine Service in England, hopefully most people are quite familiar with this structure, but essentially the way that it is set up, so I sit in the genomics unit in NHS England, which is the commissioner for the service, and we've split the country into 7 regions. These 7 regions do not align with our other NHS England regions quite, but that's because they align with our genomic laboratory hubs, which are very much central to this. Supporting the genomic laboratory hubs, we have our Genomic Medicine Service alliances that help provide that clinical leadership and support to embed these genomic tests into our mainstream services. We also have 17 clinical genomics units, and we work very closely with a number of partners such as Genomics England, who support us on a number of things, including whole genome sequencing, and that should now be the National Genomics Education Team, who were previously part of HE and now are also with us in NHS England. These are some of the key principles, and ultimately our aim is to integrate genomic medicine into patient pathways. So how are we realising the value of genomics? So as hopefully has come across, we're very keen to do this at a national level. And I think just to say, obviously for this meeting, we also collaborate quite closely and make sure that we have representation across our devolved nations in a lot of our meetings and discussions. So obviously we come at it from an England perspective, but hopefully I think there is unity across the 4 nations. We also have a focus, as I'll talk a bit more today, on optimising medicines and effective treatments, early intervention and diagnosis, and bringing the future of genomics into the NHS. And as I've mentioned, we have a multi-specialty approach, multi-professional, so we have all sorts of staff groups supporting us, and cross-professional involvement in MDTs, which I think is particularly important when we're trying to drive forward pharmacogenomics, and we are multi-regional. So now to start thinking about how this is affecting our use of treatments, we see kind of our genomic medicine service supporting a number of different areas in terms of the use of medicines, and these are kind of outlined here. So if we go from the very top in terms of kind of our cutting edge gene therapies, we also have more and more new targeted treatments. A lot of these we see coming through potentially through technology appraisals and such, and again we work very closely with NICE to support the use of these. Pharmacogenomics more broadly, so how we can use the testing to support the dosing and usage of medicines. Repurposing, so we've obviously seen some examples of that in recent years and we'll probably see more, and also predicting in terms of drug resistance and pathogen resistance. So the backbone of all of that, of course, is the testing that we can provide. So I just want to give a quick overview of our National Genomic Test Directory. This, again, aligns with our approach that it is available nationally and once. So if a test is listed on the National Genomic Test Directory, wherever you are in the country, you will be able to access that test. It covers a full repertoire of testing and technologies, and at the moment, we have about 3,200 tests on rare disease and about 200 indications for cancer. But also within those, and I'll touch upon them very quickly, we are starting to see some pharmacogenomic examples within those areas. And in order to evaluate those tests, we're supported by our test evaluation working groups that provide expertise from those areas, so we can advise our clinical reference group in terms of considering which tests are put onto the directory. So just to highlight at the top, for a while we've had a rare and inherited disease group, we have cancer groups, but we also now have a pharmacogenomics test evaluation working group, providing that expertise on applications to the directory, thinking about their utility and implementation. So I won't go into this slide in detail just for time, but this is kind of just an overview of some of our tests for rare inherited disease. Obviously, it covers a wide range of specialties. Just to highlight, which I'll go, and we've obviously heard a little bit about that this morning, we do have a pharmacogenomic test in there for mitochondrial RNR1 variant for the use of aminoglycoside, for the risk of aminoglycoside-induced hearing loss. So again, if you weren't familiar, hopefully after this morning you are familiar that this variant is associated with an increased risk of aminoglycoside-induced hearing loss. So we do have a test on the test directory, a laboratory test, that is available for patients with certain chronic diseases that are likely to be treated with these antibiotics, and therefore they can have this test preemptively, and that can inform their treatment in the future as to whether or not they can be advised to have these antibiotics. It was also mentioned this morning, as we know, that there was the PALO study that took place in Manchester, and you've probably seen the early value assessment that's come through from NICE, and that's kind of starting to consider point of care tests. Again, I won't go into huge detail about this, but most of you are probably aware of this, but this is kind of the other end of the spectrum. So for the treatments that we give to quite a lot of people, to kind of our gene therapies, and this is a really nice example. So this is Teddy, who was able to receive Libmeldi thanks to a diagnosis via what was then our rapid exome sequencing from our Southwest Genomic Laboratory hub. So again, having access to those diseases, both the pharmacogenomic and diagnostic, is really enabling our patients to have access to cutting-edge therapies as soon as possible. In terms of cancer, again, we have a number of tests on our directory, both for germline and somatic testing, and we're seeing an increasing number of those that can inform the use of treatments. We have, again, I will touch upon, and I think everyone will be aware, of pharmacogenomic tests like DPYD, but we also obviously have germline testing such as for BRCA, and we also have a number of panels for certain tumours, which is now enabling access to more targeted treatments, and I have an example of that at the moment. So an example is for lung cancer, and looking at certain gene fusions which can then which then are a gateway to accessing certain drugs via the Cancer Drugs Fund. And as I have mentioned, I think previously, we work very closely with NICE to ensure that those treatments that require testing for access, how is that testing available via our service. So this is just an overview of the DPYD pharmacogenetic testing, which I think most people should be aware of. But obviously, it's a real great triumph for us in the service, because this test is now available to anyone who needs 5-FU chemotherapy, which, as we know, is used in a lot of solid tumour cancers. And by doing this test and identifying either those who are deficient or have partial deficiency for the DPD enzyme, then we can reduce the risk of harm and also potentially death. And then this is just a case study, which if you read the strategy, it's in there. But just to say very quickly, this is just a highlight in terms of the fact of using our panel testing. So in the case of lung cancer, for Sarah, it was able to identify a ROS1 fusion, and that meant that she was able to access entrectinib, which she reported really improved her quality of life. So now to go in a little bit more detail about precision medicine, pharmacogenomics, and clinical implementation. So how are we starting to draw all of these things together? Many people, particularly those in England, will probably be very familiar with this blue circle in the centre. So this is our medicines optimisation circle, contains our 4 key principles of medicines optimisation, and we've had it in the NHS for a number of years. As part of our work, and within the team at the Genomics Unit, we work very closely with the team in pharmacy. We are ensuring that we are linking our priorities in terms of genomics and medicines optimization. So really considering those principles and how can we support that in terms of the use of genomics to inform medicines optimization. So we've discussed a number of these. I think it's really important to us that we can ensure access to cutting-edge technologies and provide personalised therapies to our patients and enable real shared decision-making and choice. In terms of the evidence-based choice of medicines, obviously, again, we have more and more of these medicines coming through, and also through the test evaluation working groups, also considering the evidence-based use of testing within our services. And to enable this, in terms of the medicines as well, we work extremely closely with our partners in the commercial medicines team who sit in NHS England, but also, as I've mentioned, NICE, MHRA, really trying to join up our medicines pathway and thinking about where genomics tests can come into that and support the use of those medicines. That is, of course, integral to all of this, is to ensure that medicines use is not only effective for some of these, but as safe as possible. So we've had some really nice examples just previously of how we can use genetic testing to inform of our risk of potential adverse drug reactions. And that is something that we are pushing forward in terms of our reviews, working with MHRA, etc., to take that forward. Overall, I've already mentioned informatics. Informatics is very important to us, but also the use of the data that is created and how we can use that sensibly to drive forward and continue building on our service. So, as with the medicines optimization circle, aligned measurement and monitoring is really important, and we're doing that as well in terms of starting to look at our medicines data and also our genomic testing data to see how we can continue to drive forward, make sure we reduce inequity, etc. And then finally, the make medicines optimization part of routine practice, again, will be a principle that anyone who has seen the circle before will be very familiar with. And I think for us, this extends further into making genomics a routine part of medicines optimization. And that's really what we are trying to do in all of the work that we're doing. And we do that by coming at it from a national level. So some of the examples I've said, at a regional level, and we're supported by a brilliant bunch, many of whom are here today, of clinical lead pharmacists in each of our regions who are helping drive this work forward, and at a local level within systems. And we're coming at it from all angles, so not just the tests, which we've talked about much, but really considering how is that implemented within our clinical pathways and overall medicines governance structures. I'm just aware of the time, but so I just wanted to highlight some of the things that we are thinking about, just to kind of go on from that thought. So rather than just thinking about the tests, we're also approaching a number of things to try and make sure we can embed this linked priority of genomics and medicine optimization. So we've talked about test evaluation and implementation, research and innovation. I briefly touched upon horizon scanning, which is very important to us. So not only horizon scanning technologies that are coming through and medicines, but the tests related to those medicines. Workforce development, I probably haven't had as much opportunity to go into as I would like, but again, we see that as really important. We have various workforce groups in the genomics space. I obviously sit on the pharmacy one, and I'm pleased to say we have a pharmacy workforce strategy coming later in the year. And we think from that work, and also all the work that's been coming in pharmacogenomics, we're hoping to see kind of moving towards a kind of multidisciplinary approach with some pharmacogenomic competencies to support this. Integrating into clinical workflows and pathways is a big part of our work, and like I say, we're very much supported not only by GMSA pharmacy clinical leads, but the wider MDT. Digital infrastructure and interoperability is absolutely key, we see, to delivering pharmacogenomics. And as I'll touch upon in a bit, one of the big projects we have in England has this as a major component. And within NHS England, we have the Genomics Prescribing Data Standards Group, which is trying to bring all of this together and make sure that we can take those principles and how we're looking at genomics within informatics in terms of pharmacogenomics and make sure we align that with the wider digital medicine space. And then finally, raising awareness and engagement. Really important. We have genomics champions across the country, and hopefully through this work and various parts, we hope to embed this even further. And also a little plug for today. I don't know how closely anyone follows the BNF updates, but you will also now see in the BNF, as of this week, we now we have a mention around genetic testing, specifically our test directory, but we wanted to make sure that it was in that information for prescribers as a consideration. Very quickly, National Genomics Education, just to mention, hopefully everybody knows who they are, but they are supporting this work. It's really important to us that our workforce are able to deliver this to our patients. And we currently have a pharmacy program, nursing and midwifery and medical. And that is the QR code if you are not familiar with their website. And then the future. So just to close up, we know that at the moment, the use of pharmacogenomic testing is limited to a few indications and some of these newer medicines coming forward, but the use of the testing is increasing. And if we look back at kind of how we've been developing the service over the last couple of years, we've had transformation projects such as DPYD, looking at implementing pharmacogenetic testing. I think it's also really important to mention some of the other transformation activity we've had where diagnostic testing has informed a better use of medicines, so familial hypercholesterolemia and monogenic diabetes. And we recognise that whilst current tests are predominantly ordered and reviewed in the specialist setting, we're working towards and have the vision of them being available, obviously, wherever the patient is with their medicines, and most likely pharmacogenomic panel testing in a non-specialist primary care and community setting. So I will not be able to do this justice at all, but just to say, last but very much not least, this, you have hopefully heard of the Progress study. There are members of the people running the study in the audience, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to talk about it in more detail. But this hopefully shows, in terms of implementing pharmacogenomics in the NHS, this was a transformation project last year. It's continuing, and the work is building on this. These are their 3 key work panels, so we want to know more about pharmacogenetic panels. The use of an informatics solution and actual implementation in practice in primary care, and that's underpinned by looking at health economics and implementation science and public and patient involvement. And they are now at the implementation stage within primary care, so they triggered by prescription of a new medicine, so antidepressant, statin, or PPI, supported by genomic prescribing advisory system. And then the vision is that after that, the recruitment geography will expand from the northwest, where it currently is, and be able to be piloted across the country, and then start to look at further outcomes and integrating with other providers. So I will stop now just to say, again, just a reminder, you know, we're pushing forward with pharmacogenomics in the NHS. You can see some in England, you can see some tests, but these are all the areas that we think are really important to drive the use of pharmacogenomics, and these are, hopefully I've given you a very small taste of all the different ways that we're supporting this in England. Thank you very much.